Welcome to another episode of Murder, Mysteries, and More. My name is Kaylee.
My name is Desi.
Today we'll be discussing the unusual disappearance of Tom Messick.
Tom Messick Sr. was an ex-parachuter in the United States Army. He was 82 at the time of his disappearance. He was very outdoorsy. Tom loved to camp, hunt, and fish. Not only did he enjoy the outdoors, but he also taught a hunting and survival class. Every year, Tom went on his annual hunting trip with his friends.
Tom was blind in one eye due to a previous gunpowder accident. He also wore hearing aids. He had a history of heart problems and recently recovered from shingles, but despite all his disabilities, he was still very much an avid hunter.
November 15th, 2015, Tom went with his camping buddies on a hunting trip and a couple younger guys in New York. They were going to camp at Lake George Wild Forest, then go to Lilly Pond to hunt deer. The four older guys went to Lilly Pond Road to set up. Each man was 100 yards down the road and 30 yards into the woods.
The younger men were up on a hill so they could scare the deer off into the direction of the older hunters. The trip started at noon and was supposed to end by 2 p.m. Everyone heads back, but Tom never showed up. They tried getting a hold of Tom on his walkie-talkie, but there was no answer.
The group decides to go look for Tom. First, they check his location and find not a single trace of Tom or his belongings. They search the woods for a couple hours and contact the rangers of the forest. The rangers searched till midnight and still could not find Tom.
A couple of hunters went back to Lilly Pond to shoot their guns and honk their horns. This was a way to alert Tom if he was still out there. The next day, a formal search begins. The FBI shows up.
10 days later, the park rangers are pulled off his search. The reason was because another elderly man went missing. His name was Fritz Drum. His car phone keys were still left on his 150-acre property.
They searched 900 acres. Neither of the men were found. They used drones, helicopters, underwater cameras, and still no signs. One of the hunters recalls hearing a strange noise in the woods.
What's even weirder is that day it was oddly quiet in the woods. Later, both men are still very much missing. We do not know what happened to these men. We hope to find answers.
Here are some questions. Could Tom have suffered from dementia or Alzheimer's, causing him to go astray? It is very possible that Tom could have had Alzheimer's or dementia. Unfortunately, Alzheimer's and dementia is often very underdiagnosed in the elderly population. My grandma, she had dementia, and it was very easy for her to get disoriented, and we would never leave her alone. It is possible that Tom did have one of these and that he could have got lost and went the wrong way. Somebody could have taken him, or he could have fell and hurt himself.
Yeah, people with Alzheimer's and dementia, they get very confused. They don't know exactly where they are sometimes, so Tom could have wandered off into the woods, and he could have tripped and fallen down the hill. He could have fallen in a hole. But yeah, like I said, people with Alzheimer's and dementia, typically they get very confused, so they start to kind of wander off and think that they're going somewhere that they're not.
And this could also be why it is hard to locate his body, because they could have thought he was in a certain direction, but he went the total opposite way. There are evidence of elderly people who have left their homes and escaped and are found very far away.
Could a tree have fallen on top of Tom and killed him? Yes, it is very possible a tree could have fallen on top of him. That could have been the noise that everybody had heard, that strange noise that they had never heard before in the woods. It could have been a tree falling, and it could have fallen on top of Tom, and it could have crushed him.
Yeah, a tree could have easily killed Tom. My grandfather actually used to cut down trees, and he actually had a tree fall on him before, and it hurt his leg pretty bad. And so I can't even imagine what would happen to this elderly man who is impaired and with all his health conditions, it could have very easily killed him. That could also be why it's very difficult to find his body, because it could have easily hit his body. There are some trees that are very large and it's very easy to kill anybody. And this was also in the winter, and there wasn't really too much information about the weather at the time, but this is in New York, so it could have been very snowy, windy. We don't exactly know. But I also do want to mention, if a tree did fall on him, still, why haven't we found any of his belongings? Could someone have taken Tom? If so, why were there no screams for help? It is very possible that Tom could have wandered back to the road and somebody could have saw him and kidnapped him. We don't know if he had, like I mentioned before, Alzheimer's or dementia. If he had one of those, it'd be easy for him to be disoriented and would make it easy to kidnap him. However, Tom was armed with a gun, so I feel like it's less likely that somebody would be willing to kidnap someone. It is still very possible, because since there is no trace of his belongings or anything, it would make a little bit more sense that somebody could have taken him. And the reason why we might not have heard any screams for help is they could have easily confused him, made it really easy to kidnap him, or depending how well the hearing of some of the other hunters and depending where he was kidnapped, they might not have been able to hear Tom screaming for help.
It could have very easily been hit from the back as well, like in the back of his head and all stuff, and that knocked him unconscious, and maybe that's why there were no screams for help.
Yeah, that is very true.
The FBI rarely shows up for adult disappearances. Why did they show up? They obviously knew something that everyone else didn't. This could have been a part of a pattern that they had noticed in missing persons or murders or anything like that. So they may have showed up because this just happened to fall in their lap and it fit a pattern that they were looking at in hopes to catch somebody who was maybe kidnapping and possibly killing older people, if you know what I mean. Somebody could have called them in and not told anybody about it, and they obviously wouldn't tell anyone else either. So there's multiple possibilities why they showed up, but it is a little odd for them to show up, especially when it's just like a missing persons case.
Yeah, I do also want to mention that this is state hunting land, so that could have also been very well a reason why the FBI showed up, and all the reasons you mentioned could very easily be the reason why. I think another reason as well is the fact that another elderly man disappeared 10 days later in kind of a similar situation. The FBI probably saw this as a pattern and saw that there's probably some sort of serial killer out there. The fact that this was an elderly man, they probably took it a little bit more serious than a regular adult, because like Tom's family knew he wasn't the type of person to just run away or walk away, and somebody else could have totally called the FBI. We may never really know. It is good that the FBI did show up because they did take this search very seriously, but unfortunately we still have a lot of missing pieces of evidence. Could someone in the hunting group have killed Tom, whether it was an accident or not? I feel like it probably wouldn't have been one of the older men, because I feel like it would have been one of the younger men, because they would have had the advantage to be able to take him out really easily. They could have possibly killed him way before they went on this hunting trip and just pretty much went on this to cover their tracks. I don't know where exactly they would have hid his body though. They would have had to come up with some sort of idea. Also, they would have had to all be in some sort of agreement into killing him, because even if just one person didn't agree, then it could very easily get them in trouble. They all did have guns, so if it was 6 guns against one guy with a gun, clearly he would have been outnumbered. Nobody else was there as a witness that day, so we really can't tell It could have also very easily been an accident. There's a lot of gun accidents that happen. You can misfire. Tom could have moved out of range and they didn't think that he was in the area close to them, and they could have accidentally shot him and really hurt him, so they thought it was just easier to just make it just seem like an accident and hide his body and cover it up, because otherwise if someone found out that they accidentally shot Tom, then it might come back and bite them and make them look like a suspect, and they wouldn't want that to happen.
Why was there not a single trace of Tom or his belongings? Gun, hat, ammo, etc. The reason why there wasn't a trace was because Tom probably still had them on him when he disappeared, which makes this more likely to be a kidnapping. Or if he fell in a sinkhole, your belongings just don't go away after that happens, although kidnappings, maybe. Belongings stay on you. Even if you're rotting away, your belongings still stay with you, and sometimes that can obviously not leave a trace. Or if somebody kidnapped him, they covered their tracks very, very well.
Yeah, it is kind of strange with both of the men in these cases that not a single trace of their belongings were basically found out there. But obviously he would still have the belongings on him. The fact that he did have his belongings so there may make it seem more like he could have fell in the sinkhole or the tree fell on him, but he could have also very easily been kidnapped as well. I feel like if we were able to locate his belongings, there would be a lot more leads. He could have also totally walked in a way different direction, and I do want to mention, like, these game lands they were hunting at was over 71,000 acres. While I don't think an elderly man could get that far, you never know when somebody's disoriented or if foul play was involved. He could be buried way farther away, because again, they only happened to search 900 of the acres, so that still leaves a lot of room to basically cover this up. Since he still had his belongings, definitely makes it seem more like foul play is involved. 10 days after the disappearance of Tom, the Rangers had to be pulled off the search because another elderly man went missing. Could the two cases be linked? It is very possible that the two cases could be linked, because the fact that both of them went missing 40 yards away from each other and the dates were 10 days apart and they both were elderly men makes it seem like there has to be some sort of serial killer out there that were kidnapping these older men and taking advantage. The fact that Tom was 100 yards away from all of the other hunters and by himself, and the fact that he's older, would make him an easy target to get kidnapped. So these two cases could very well be linked, but it could also be just pure coincidence.
Could Tom have fallen into a sinkhole? Very likely he could have fallen into a sinkhole. There are holes and sinkholes in the forest. He could have made the wrong step and accidentally fell into a hole that was maybe later covered up by like leaves or snow or anything like that. The hole was just so deep that nobody would be able to find him down there. So it's very possible.
Yeah, it could be very easily a sinkhole. I know that there's a lot of sinkholes in the United States that happen all the time, and that could make sense why we have not been able to locate his body. This is the woods, so there's all sorts of like weird nature instances out there, and the fact that they heard a noise that they never heard before could have very easily been them hearing the sinkhole, and that could be an explanation on what happened to Tom.
Which leads into our next question.
Another hunter heard a strange noise. Noticed the woods was oddly quiet that day. What was that noise? There are a number of different things the noise could be. If it was foul play, it could be them hearing a car door or a trunk shut. It could be a tree falling. They may have never heard of a tree falling before. The strange noise could be a sinkhole. It could have been a weird animal that we don't know about, maybe an undiscovered species. but I feel like we would probably have seen a blood trail. So it makes it seem more like one of the previous 3 theories.
You don't really hear the sound of trees falling all that much or sinkholes forming all that much, so it's definitely a very strange noise.
Did Tom have a suicide pact with his friends and family? So some context about this is that there is a theory that because Tom loved hunting so much and he had these heart problems, he was blind in one eye and he had hearing problems. A lot of elderly people get frustrated because they're not able to do something they enjoy like they used to be able to do. The theory is that Tom was extremely upset about this and that he possibly took his life because pretty much what's the point of him still living on if he can't do the stuff that he once was able to do? He can only hunt with assistance, and a lot of men are afraid to ask for help, and it is common for a lot of elderly people to go through mental depression because during that time of your life you're not able to do a lot of things you were able to when you're younger.
Why have we not been able to locate his body? The reasons why we haven't been able to locate his body is because he was either kidnapped, so that would be an obvious reason, and they haven't dumped his body yet, or dumped him off on the side of the street. Another reason is that he could have fallen into a very, very, very deep sinkhole that nobody would be able to find his body in, or he could have been crushed by a tree, although that would have left probably a blood spatter and all stuff. If he was crushed by a tree, it's very possible that his body is completely stuck under the tree and they just can't find his body under the tree. It's still a mystery that we don't know as to why nobody has found his body yet, and hopefully maybe we'll get some answers one day, but for now those are the only theories that kind of make sense.
Yeah, the reason why we haven't been able to find his body is either A, he had some sort of thing such as dementia or Alzheimer's and he wandered off in a different direction, and so the FBI wasn't really focused in that direction. A tree fell on him and hurt himself. He could have had a heart attack. He could have very easily fell into a sinkhole. This might seem crazy, but it might make more sense because I feel like we would probably have more leads if it was something else, but he could have also very easily been kidnapped, or foul play with the other fellow hunters could have been involved. Who knows where his body is, and because he was kidnapped, the FBI would not know where to look. So that is probably the reason why we haven't located his body. What do we believe that happened to Tom? This case has so many different potential answers. All of them have different reasons why they would make sense. Like, first of all, him having dementia and running off and not being found. There's a lot of things that could make sense about that. However, I feel like if he wandered off and he had some sort of heart attack or stroke, I feel like we probably would have been able to pick up his scent and find him. And then kidnapping also makes sense, but also doesn't, because the thing with kidnapping is he had a rifle, and so it just seems like a kidnapper would be deterred. Even if he wasn't able to capably shoot his gun, he could have still hit them very easily with the gun. That's the one reason why that one doesn't make sense. But it also does make sense because there are a lot of kidnappings of elderly men and we haven't been able to find any of his belongings. The tree falling on him or him falling in a sinkhole also does both make sense because I heard a strange noise that they've never heard before. The fact that both of those would have been very easily been able to not find his body. With the sinkhole, who knows? So in that instance, I'm stuck between a kidnapping and a sinkhole incident. And the suicide thing could still be a thing, like we can't completely rule that out, but I feel like there would be a note, and I feel like we would have probably found his body. Love to hunt, so I feel like there would be a note, and I feel like we would have also found his body.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of possibilities here. My thing is, I feel like maybe Tom just happened to step in a hole and he plummeted through into that hole, and just nobody has found him yet or found that hole. It could be covered up at this point. He could have been kidnapped, but like you said, he had a rifle. But if he had Alzheimer's and dementia, he would have been very confused, and maybe the person who was trying to kidnap him was very convincing and told him, hey, like a friend of yours, come with me, we'll get somewhere safe, or I'll take you home, blah blah blah. Persuaded him to get in the car and kidnap him that way.
This would have been a perfect setup too, as well. The fact that all the hunters were far away from each other. He was it was the middle of the woods. This just seems like a perfect storm for a disaster. So remember, if you go in the woods, don't go too far and try to go in groups, kind of stick with each other. Don't go far apart because you never know what's going to happen.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Murders, Mysteries, and More. Remember to always keep your eyes open. You never know when someone's creeping.